Good evening. We begin tonight with a significant and strategic diplomatic development concerning the war in Ukraine, one that underscores the vast gulf separating the combatants, even as the prospect of peace moves into a formal stage of preparation. Kyiv has formally finalized and signed off on its newest, comprehensive peace initiative, a detailed diplomatic blueprint intended to define the terms under which the ongoing conflict might eventually cease. The Ukrainian leadership has confirmed that this document, which they refer to internally as Peace Path 3.0, is now complete and circulating among trusted international intermediaries. However, the critical counterpoint to this momentous announcement comes directly from Moscow. The Kremlin asserts, in the strongest possible terms, that it has not received any formal, informal, or even indirect communication regarding the proposal. This immediate divergence highlights the immense challenge facing any potential de-escalation effort. One side is pushing a concrete plan for peace, while the other claims to be entirely unaware of its contents, having learned of its existence solely through international media reports. The timeline surrounding this development is exceptionally condensed, taking place over the past 48 hours, signaling a calculated acceleration of diplomatic activity by Kyiv during the closing weeks of the year. In the administrative heart of Kyiv, amidst the persistent wartime resilience, the Office of the President of Ukraine, or UPO, issued a definitive statement late yesterday afternoon, confirming the completion of the final draft. This was not merely an announcement of intent, but a formal confirmation that the complex, multifaceted diplomatic framework had successfully navigated the final political vetting process, achieving sign-off from all relevant committees within the capital's highest governing structures. The meticulous finalization process, which stretched through Tuesday and into Wednesday morning, involved extensive internal consultations to ensure total political unity before the document's official release sequence began. Simultaneously, the diplomatic circuit has already begun its function. On the morning hours of today, Wednesday, a crucial step was confirmed by a neutral intermediary nation. The Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, known by its abbreviation FDFA, officially acknowledged the receipt of a confidential pre-circulation draft. This Swiss involvement is highly strategic. Bern confirmed its role is strictly advisory at this stage, focusing on two key areas. First, assessing potential pathways for initial, secure contact between Kyiv and Moscow, and second, meticulously ensuring the proposal adheres fully to established international law standards and conventions, thereby maximizing its diplomatic credibility on the global stage. This diplomatic package is neither arbitrary nor sudden. It is firmly rooted in pre-existing principles articulated by the Ukrainian leadership over the last 3 years. The deputy head of the presidential office, Zaporizhzhia, made a public statement just this Monday, December 15th, confirming that the entire document is structured meticulously around the core tenets of the widely publicized 10-point peace formula. This formula was initially proposed by President Volodymyr Zelensky during late 2022, and it has since served as the unwavering diplomatic foundation for Kyiv's international advocacy. Mr. Zaporizhzhia was specific about the crucial areas of focus within this new iteration, Peace Path 3.0. He highlighted two non-negotiable points that have been heavily elaborated in the final draft. First, the mechanisms for comprehensive war crimes accountability, insisting on robust international tribunals and investigative powers. And second, guaranteed, long-term energy security for Ukraine and the wider European continent, a point that has gained particular urgency following Russia's sustained targeting of Ukrainian energy infrastructure. While Kyiv was busy finalizing its text, parallel diplomatic consultations were underway with its primary international backers. Official statements released by the Canadian Foreign Ministry confirmed that senior diplomats representing the Group of Seven, the G7 industrialized nations, were briefed on the foundational and directional elements of the proposal. This consultation took place during a closed-door teleconference held yesterday, Tuesday, December 16th. While the G7 diplomats were given a strategic overview of Kyiv's intent and core demands, they have not yet confirmed receipt of the full, finalized legal text. This phased distribution suggests a coordinated strategy by Ukraine to secure firm political backing from its allies before the document is formally presented to the international community and eventually to Moscow. Asterisk. Now let us turn to the immediate and firm reaction from the Russian capital, Moscow, a reaction that defines the current deadlock. The central denial came earlier today from Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, during his regular daily briefing with accredited journalists. Mr. Peskov claimed emphatically that Moscow has not received any formal, informal, or indirect communication, nor any draft text from Kyiv or any mediating party. He went on to assert that the leadership in the Kremlin learned of the proposal's completion exclusively through public media reports and wire service dispatches circulating globally. This claim of total non-receipt sets a highly skeptical, if not dismissive, tone for any future engagement. But the denial of receipt is just one part of Moscow's position. Mr. Peskov simultaneously reiterated a long-standing, non-negotiable policy precondition that Russia insists must be satisfied by any peace proposal, regardless of its content or origin. He stated plainly that any negotiation or resulting agreement, even if eventually received, must satisfy the precondition that Kyiv and its international backers must formally recognize what Moscow refers to as the new territorial realities. This is the Kremlin's shorthand reference to the internationally disputed annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions: Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia, following sham referenda conducted in 2022, in addition to the prior annexation of Crimea in 2014. For Moscow, this recognition is the cost of entry to any talks. For Kyiv and the West, it is an absolute red line that violates fundamental international law protecting territorial integrity. This precondition remains the most formidable diplomatic obstacle. Despite Moscow's public disavowal of awareness, Kyiv appears committed to a defined timeline for moving the proposal into the formal diplomatic channel. A senior Ukrainian parliamentary official, speaking anonymously to the Kyiv Independent, claimed that the formal diplomatic submission of the complete document to Russia is planned for the first week of January 2026. This submission is expected to be delivered via a designated intermediary, likely one of the parties currently reviewing the text, such as Switzerland, or perhaps a representative of the United Nations. Crucially, this anonymous source stressed that this timetable represents a firm deadline for the presentation, indicating that Kyiv intends to move forward regardless of any prior Russian engagement or stated resistance. Asterisk. The contents of Peace Path 3.0 remain under high security, but several unverified claims, citing senior European diplomatic sources, have emerged regarding the document's highly specific and demanding conditions. These claims, first reported by Reuters, paint a picture of a document designed not just for peace, but for a structured, verifiable Russian retreat. One of the most immediate and impactful reported demands concerns the highly strategic Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, or ZNPP, which has been under Russian military control since the earliest days of the full-scale invasion in 2022. The unconfirmed reports suggest the proposal includes a stipulation for a 90-day phased cessation of hostilities. This initial ceasefire phase would be explicitly contingent on the full demilitarization and subsequent transfer of control of the ZNPP back to the Ukrainian state and international atomic safety authorities. The fate of the ZNPP, the largest nuclear facility in Europe, remains a critical security flashpoint, and its inclusion as a first-stage precondition would dramatically raise the stakes of any negotiation. Demilitarization would require the complete removal of Russian heavy weaponry, personnel, and defensive fortifications surrounding the plant's 6 reactors and crucial infrastructure. Beyond military and nuclear concerns, the document is also rumored to contain highly specific financial demands. The unverified reports claim the proposal calls for the immediate establishment of a UN-mandated international reparations fund. Kyiv is reportedly seeking an initial capitalization for this fund of a staggering 450 billion euros, or approximately $490 billion. This figure, if accurate, reflects the preliminary estimate of physical damage, humanitarian costs, and economic loss inflicted upon Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and potentially extending back to 2014. Such a financial demand would require the utilization of frozen Russian state assets held in Western banks, a politically contentious but increasingly discussed topic among G7 finance ministers. These details, while officially unconfirmed, strongly align with the framework of accountability and redress that the 10-point peace formula mandates. Asterisk. But perhaps the most revealing insight into Kyiv's strategy comes from an analysis of the proposal's primary purpose, which may extend beyond immediate negotiations. The U.S. National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, provided this analysis during a televised interview on Monday, December 15th. Mr. Sullivan asserted that the primary strategic purpose of the new document is not the immediate start of bilateral talks with Russia, which he noted are widely understood to be unlikely in the current environment. Rather, he claimed the document is designed to force the international community, particularly the Global South, to identify Russia as the sole impediment to peace. This assertion emphasizes the crucial diplomatic battleground that lies outside the trenches. The court of international public opinion, particularly among nations that have chosen to remain non-aligned or neutral regarding the conflict. The Global South, encompassing major powers like India, Brazil, South Africa, and key nations in Southeast Asia and the Middle East, represents a critical demographic. These nations are heavily impacted by the conflict's ripple effects, particularly spikes in global food and energy prices, yet they often harbor skepticism toward Western-led diplomatic initiatives. By presenting a detailed UN-adherent peace framework and publicly setting a timeline, Kyiv forces Moscow to either engage with verifiable demands for de-escalation or publicly reject them outright. Should Russia reject a carefully constructed, internationally endorsed plan based solely on its demand for territorial annexation recognition, it strengthens the U.S. and Ukrainian narrative that Russia is fundamentally uninterested in genuine peace, thereby isolating Moscow further from non-aligned states. To fully appreciate the significance of Peace Path 3.0, one must understand the context of the last decade, tracing the origins of the current diplomatic deadlock. The conflict did not begin in February 2022. Its modern iteration began in 2014, following the Revolution of Dignity in Kyiv, which saw a shift toward Euro-Atlantic integration. Russia responded swiftly by annexing the Crimean Peninsula and backing separatist movements in the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. For the subsequent 8 years, the international focus was on the Minsk agreements. Minsk I, signed in September 2014, and Minsk II, signed in February 2015. These agreements, brokered by France and Germany and involving Russia and Ukraine, sought to establish a ceasefire, troop withdrawal, constitutional reform, and restoration of Ukrainian control over its borders. However, neither agreement was ever fully implemented. They suffered from fundamental ambiguities regarding the sequence of political steps versus security measures, and both sides consistently accused the other of violations. Crucially, the spirit of Minsk was always shadowed by Moscow's insistence that Kyiv negotiate directly with its proxy authorities in the Donbas, while Kyiv maintained the conflict was one between Ukraine and Russia. The failure of the Minsk framework cemented a low-intensity, static conflict along a 250-mile front line, creating a frozen conflict that proved deeply unstable. The landscape shifted fundamentally in February 2022 with Russia's full-scale invasion. This act destroyed any remaining veneer of the Minsk process and forced Ukraine's diplomatic efforts to evolve from managing a low-intensity conflict to demanding a complete, comprehensive exit by the invading force. In the initial weeks of the full-scale war, there were fleeting attempts at direct negotiations, most notably in Istanbul, Turkey, in the spring of 2022. These talks yielded a preliminary framework that included potential provisions for Ukraine's neutrality in exchange for international security guarantees. However, these negotiations collapsed quickly as the scale of Russian atrocities became clear and as Ukraine successfully repelled the initial assault on Kyiv, strengthening its negotiating position and raising its demands. This collapse led directly to the formation of the 10-point peace formula, which forms the basis of the current proposal. When President Zelensky first introduced the formula in late 2022, it was seen as a maximalist, high-bar diplomatic tool, primarily focused on establishing global support rather than immediate talks. Its 10 points cover crucial elements such as nuclear safety, food security, energy security, the release of all prisoners, implementation of the UN Charter, restoration of territorial integrity, withdrawal of Russian troops, justice, prevention of escalation, and confirmation of the end of the war. The current document, Peace Path 3.0, is the formalization of that high-bar formula into a detailed, ready-to-present legal document. Its preparation signals Kyiv's move from simply stating its principles to structuring a globally marketable solution. Asterisk. The geopolitical implications of this diplomatic push extend far beyond the immediate front lines. The move impacts the strategic calculations of NATO, China, and the crucial non-aligned world. For the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the European Union, the Ukrainian proposal is a welcome development. It provides a structured diplomatic basis for their continued support, framing their military and financial assistance not merely as prolonged warfare, but as support for a viable, articulated path to peace based on international law. It reinforces the Western narrative that any cessation of fighting must not be a mere freeze of the conflict along current lines, but must ensure Ukraine's sovereign future. Furthermore, the detailed demands regarding accountability and reparations signal to Western governments the sheer scale of the long-term reconstruction effort that must be planned for, tying the diplomatic efforts directly to future economic stability. The G7 briefing confirmed yesterday highlights the unified strategic effort to prepare a diplomatic and financial bulwark behind Kyiv's plan. For China, the world's most significant non-Western power that has attempted to maintain a posture of strategic neutrality, the proposal introduces fresh complexity. Beijing issued its own 12-point position paper on the crisis in February 2023, which generally called for peace talks but offered minimal detail on territorial integrity or the status of Russian troops. China remains Moscow's most vital economic and political lifeline, yet Beijing is acutely sensitive to international accusations that it is aiding a violation of sovereignty, a principle China holds dear in its own foreign policy. The Ukrainian proposal, by formally demanding Russian recognition of Ukrainian sovereignty over all occupied territories and adherence to the UN Charter, forces China to either tacitly support a document that endorses territorial integrity or risk aligning more visibly with Russia's territorial demands, potentially damaging its relationships with the European Union and the Global South. This strategic pressure point is intentional. Finally, and perhaps most critically in the eyes of U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, the proposal targets the Global South. For many nations across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, the war is viewed through a lens of economic disruption and geopolitical fatigue. They are weary of the conflict and often skeptical of Western motivations. By detailing specific solutions to global issues, such as the explicit focus on ensuring energy security and potentially resolving the ZNPP crisis, Kyiv is attempting to reframe the conflict not as a regional European fight, but as a direct challenge to global stability. If Russia rejects a proposal that addresses international food and energy concerns, it becomes harder for neutral nations to maintain their posture of non-alignment without appearing to ignore core interests. The alleged demands, particularly the specifics regarding the demilitarization of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, represent a clear attempt to engage international institutions like the International Atomic Energy Agency, drawing them deeper into the diplomatic architecture and raising the global stakes of continued Russian control. Asterisk. Returning to the immediate dynamics of negotiation, the strategic importance of the January 2026 deadline cannot be overstated. By setting a firm timeline for formal submission, Kyiv is effectively implementing a take-it-or-leave-it diplomatic strategy, even if immediate talks are not expected. If the document is formally presented via a neutral third party, such as Switzerland or the United Nations Secretary-General, in early January, Moscow will face a clear diplomatic choice. Either formally reject the proposal and incur the accompanying international criticism, or accept the document for review, which, however reluctantly, opens the narrowest aperture for potential dialogue. The current diplomatic reality is defined by a paradox. Russia demands territorial recognition, a price Kyiv will never pay, and Kyiv demands a complete Russian withdrawal and accountability, a price Moscow will never accept under current circumstances. Given this fundamental incompatibility, the true purpose of Peace Path 3.0 is not to yield an immediate armistice. It is instead a sophisticated diplomatic weapon. It serves three core functions. First, solidifying international legitimacy. It ensures that Ukraine, not Russia, is perceived as the state actively seeking peace through established international mechanisms. This is vital for sustaining the flow of Western military and financial aid, which depends heavily on public and political endorsement. Second, creating a benchmark for future talks. The document sets the minimum acceptable parameters for Kyiv. Any future negotiation, whenever it may occur, will begin with the 10-point formula as the established international baseline, preventing pressure on Ukraine to revert to the looser, less specific terms that characterized the failed Minsk agreements of the past. Third, increasing pressure on Moscow's allies. As discussed, the level of detail regarding reparations, war crimes accountability, and territorial restoration places significant diplomatic strain on Moscow's partners, forcing them to justify their continued support in the face of a formalized, internationally verifiable peace plan. The Kremlin's current posture, claiming total ignorance while simultaneously reiterating the annexation precondition, is predictable. It attempts to discredit the proposal's legitimacy before it is even officially delivered. However, the clock is now ticking toward the anticipated January submission. The path ahead remains difficult and fraught with potential for escalation. The battle is currently shifting from the field of maneuver to the field of diplomacy, where symbols, deadlines, and international law are the primary weapons. The strategic move by Kyiv to finalize and circulate Peace Path 3.0 marks the beginning of a new, complex chapter in the war, transitioning from a focus purely on military resistance to a unified effort for internationally recognized terms of conclusion. We will continue to track the responses of the intermediary nations and the final response, or non-response, from the Russian Federation in the coming days and weeks. Good night.